Her son tossed her memories to the curb, called them filth. Marge Ellis didn't raise her voice. He thought he owned the house, the rules, and her silence. 30 days later, he was packing under court order, while she changed the locks. She wasn't just his mother anymore. She was the owner, the plaintiff, and the last word. And when he came back with excuses, the deed around her neck did all the talking. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. The sound reached her before the sight did. The dull thud of cardboard hitting pavement, the sharp crack of something ceramic inside it. Marge Ellis slowed her walk halfway down Birchwood Lane, squinting against the noon glare. The air smelled faintly of wet leaves and last night's rain. She clutched her grocery tote tighter, sensing before she even reached her driveway that something was wrong. Her front lawn looked like a yard sale gone mad. Battered sewing bins, plastic tubs of yarn, photo boxes with handwritten labels, Family Trips 1989, Lucy's First Day, Tom's Tools, all scattered along the curb beside the garbage cans. A half-draped quilt fluttered on the rim of one can like a flag of surrender. Her wedding quilt. She stopped breathing for a moment. Sean stood on the porch, sleeves rolled up, clipboard in hand like some self-appointed foreman. "We're decluttering, Mom. It's time," he said, as if this were some practical household upgrade, not an execution. Marge's voice barely made it out. "Decluttering?" He smiled, that tight managerial smile that never reached his eyes. "Yeah. You got too much old stuff clogging up the place. Monica's trying to create some space for everyone." From behind the screen door, Monica's tone cut sharp as bleach. "That old stuff's just filth collecting dust, Marge. You should thank us for helping." Marge set her tote down. The paper handles quivered against her wrist. The street was too quiet. Even the neighbor's dog seemed to hold its breath. On the other side of the window, Lucy's small face appeared, pale and still. The girl's hand pressed to the glass but didn't wave. Marge stepped closer, her shoes sinking slightly in the damp grass. "You went through my sewing room?" Sean shrugged, looking past her as if he were bored already. "We needed to. You weren't doing anything about it. Half that junk hadn't been touched in years." She looked at the quilt again. Threads of pale pink and cream, stitched decades ago on nights when the house still held laughter. Now it sagged in the bin like something diseased. A corner had slid into a puddle, the fabric darkening where the water crept in. Her throat tightened. "I was going to wash that today," she said softly. Sean frowned. "Mom, please don't make a scene. We're just trying to make the place livable." Livable, as if her memories had been suffocating the walls. Monica came outside, phone in hand, recording something, probably for her organizing blog. "See? Fresh start," she chirped, panning the camera toward the heap of Marge's history. "People hold on to so much unnecessary clutter." Marge stared at her daughter-in-law. Monica's nails were glossy, her perfume heavy and citrusy. "Those are my family's things," Marge said, her voice calm but tremoring at the edges. "Were," Monica corrected. "You said yourself you barely use them." Marge turned away before the burn in her eyes could break. She bent, carefully lifting the top photo box. The lid had split. Inside, the faces of her husband and a younger Sean peeked through smears of damp ink. She swallowed hard, closed it again, and stacked it in her arms. Then another. And another. Sean sighed, exasperated. "Mom, leave it. The truck's coming any minute." "I know," she said. Her tone was measured, almost gentle. "That's why I'm taking what's mine before someone else does." Monica laughed, an incredulous, cruel little sound. "You can't keep hoarding." But Marge wasn't listening anymore. She moved slowly, methodically, rescuing what she could. The sun had shifted high, lighting up the thin gray streaks in her hair, the small determined lines around her mouth. Every item she saved was a small defiance, a heartbeat refusing to stop. Lucy slipped out the front door, barefoot, whispering, "Grandma, let me help." Sean's voice boomed, "Lucy, inside." The girl hesitated, eyes wide. Marge gave her a tiny nod, a silent promise. "It's all right, sweetheart." Lucy backed away, guilt written across her face. By the time Marge carried the last of the boxes to the porch, her arms ached, and her blouse clung damp against her skin. Sean stood in the doorway, blocking her path. "This can't keep happening," he said. "Either we do this the right way, or you'll force us to make changes you won't like." Marge met his eyes, and for the first time her gaze didn't waver. "You've already made them," she said quietly. She stepped past him, the smell of his cologne bitter in her nose, and went inside. The walls seemed to hum with silence. She placed the boxes on the kitchen table, survivors of a quiet war, and touched the quilt gently, brushing off a streak of mud. Outside, the garbage truck groaned to life, gears grinding. Sean's voice faded into the sound, giving some quick excuse to a neighbor walking by. Marge didn't listen. She watched through the window as the men heaved the rest of her life into the compactor, the lid closing with a metallic slam. Her hand trembled, then stilled. She whispered, almost to herself, "They won't throw me out that easily." The rumble of the truck faded down the street, but her words stayed, low and certain, in the empty kitchen air. The next morning, sunlight poured through the kitchen window in narrow, accusing lines. Dust motes floated over the table where Marge's rescued boxes sat like wounded soldiers. She hadn't slept. Not really. Just sat in the recliner, quilt over her lap, listening to the refrigerator hum and the wind scratch against the siding. Sean had already left for work. Monica's heels had clicked down the hallway before dawn, her perfume hanging in the air long after the car pulled away. The house was too quiet now, the kind of quiet that made thoughts grow sharp. Marge slid open the drawer under the old phone stand and pulled out a thin manila envelope. Inside were papers she hadn't looked at in years: tax receipts, Tom's death certificate, and the brittle, blue-edged document that still smelled faintly of ink and time: the deed. She unfolded it carefully, smoothing the creases with trembling fingers. 2 names: Thomas and Margaret Ellis. No Sean, no Monica. For a long moment she just stared at it, her pulse steadying with each word she read. Then she smiled. Small, private, almost dangerous. "So that's how it is," she murmured. A knock came at the back door. 3 quick taps. Familiar. Marcia Woods stepped in without waiting for permission, clutching her canvas tote full of folded papers and something that smelled like cinnamon muffins. Her eyes took in the kitchen table, the damp boxes, the faint mud stains on the floor. "They did it again, didn't they?" Marcia asked, voice low. Marge nodded once. "The quilt, the photos, half the sewing room's gone." Marcia set down the muffins and reached for her glasses. "Lord have mercy. And you let that boy talk to you like you were a tenant in your own home?" "I didn't let him," Marge said softly. "He just thinks I did." Marcia gave her a look, the kind she'd used back at the library when teenagers tried to return books with pages torn out. "You're still the legal homeowner, Marge. It's your name on that paper, not his." Marge turned the deed so her friend could see it. The names gleamed faintly under the sunlight. "Then," she said, straightening, "it's time I started acting like it." Marcia grinned, a flash of the fierce woman she'd always been. "Now we're talking." The 2 women spent an hour going over every document in that drawer: birth certificates, the old mortgage release, insurance notices. Marcia read each one with the precision of someone who never forgot the power of a well-placed comma. By noon, Marge tucked the deed into a plastic sleeve, slipped it into her purse, and buttoned her cardigan. "I need copies," she said. "Real ones." The Cleveland Public Library sat just 4 blocks away, its brick walls warm against the late morning sun. Marge hadn't walked there in months, the familiar creak of the door and faint scent of paper and toner wrapped around her like memory itself. The copy machine buzzed to life. Each page slid out clean, black ink crisp against white paper. Proof of ownership, of identity, of quiet rebellion. When she stepped outside, the world looked different. Brighter, maybe. Or maybe it was just that she finally saw the edges of her own power again. At the corner, a bus hissed to a stop. A young mother herded her kids aboard. A man fed pigeons near the bench. Ordinary life went on. And yet, for Marge, something tectonic had shifted. She walked home slowly, her purse heavy with more than paper. By the time she reached her street, the garbage cans were gone, the curb bare except for a dark stain where water had dried. Sean's truck was back in the driveway. She could hear voices from inside. Sean's low rumble, Monica's clipped tone. She hesitated at the mailbox, pretending to check for letters. Lucy's face appeared at the window again, then vanished. A moment later, the side door cracked open, just enough for a small hand to slip through and drop something onto the porch. When Marge climbed the steps, she saw it. A folded piece of notebook paper with her name written in purple marker. She opened it. "Sorry they're so mean. I don't like it when they yell. I think your quilt is pretty. Lucy." The handwriting wobbled, letters large and uneven. A single sticker of a sunflower was pressed beside her name. Marge read it twice, the edges of the page trembling between her fingers. Then she folded it gently and slid it into her purse, right beside the deed. Inside, Sean's voice rose again, something about rules and control. Marge turned the key in the lock, closing the door softly behind her. Her reflection caught in the hallway mirror. Older, yes, but not broken. She looked straight into her own eyes and said under her breath, "Let's see who really owns this house." The rain started again that night. Thin, steady, the kind that whispered against the siding. Marge sat in her bedroom with the door closed, the house dim except for a weak glow from the hallway light. Somewhere downstairs, the television murmured under Sean's voice, his laugh too loud, too false. Monica's shoes clicked across the floor in short, irritated bursts. Marge waited until the noise settled into the steady rhythm of routine, the hum of the dishwasher, the creak of pipes, the faint thud of doors closing. Then she stood, brushed crumbs from her lap, and looked around her room. What was left of her things barely filled half the space. The dresser, a few framed photos, her husband's watch, the rescued boxes stacked neatly along the wall. The quilt hung over the footboard now, washed and dry, its stitches faint but unbroken. She moved to the small hallway closet, the one Sean had called wasted space. She opened it slowly. The air inside smelled faintly of cedar and old fabric softener. Empty hangers clinked like hollow bones. "Not wasted," she murmured. "Just waiting." Marge spent the next hour clearing and arranging. The closet became her vault, a tiny fortress inside enemy walls. The deed went into a plastic sleeve on the top shelf. Beneath it, the quilt folded tight, the photo boxes stacked by year. The letter from Lucy pressed flat between 2 hardcovers of Little Women. She placed Tom's watch last, right in the center. The silver gleamed faintly in the low light, a pulse of memory. When everything was in place, she stepped back, studying it with quiet satisfaction. Then she took a small brass lock and latch from the nightstand drawer, the kind sold at the hardware store for $9 and change. She drilled 2 careful holes with an old hand tool Tom had left behind. the rhythmic click, click, click steady as a heartbeat. The metal fit perfectly. When the lock clicked shut, it made a sound like finality. From the hall came Monica's voice, edged with that impatient sweetness she used when pretending to care. "Marge, what's all that noise? Are you rearranging again?" Marge didn't open the door. "Just organizing. You always said it helps." A pause. Then Monica's voice sharpened. "What's with the drama? You're not hiding anything, are you?" Marge smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that Monica couldn't see. "Privacy," she said, "like you always say." Footsteps approached, then stopped right outside the door. "Don't get smart with me," Monica snapped. "Sean won't like this mood of yours." "He usually doesn't," Marge said simply. The sound of heels retreated down the hall. A door shut. Silence returned. Marge touched the lock once more, the cool metal firm under her fingertips. She slipped the tiny key onto a thin chain and clasped it around her neck. The metal rested against her collarbone, a weight small but certain. Her new heartbeat. Downstairs, the TV flickered blue light against the ceiling. Sean laughed again at something that wasn't funny. Marge turned off her bedside lamp, leaving the room in darkness except for the faint sheen of the lock's key. The next morning brought confrontation. Sean stood in the hallway, arms crossed, blocking the doorway like a guard. "What's this about locking doors now? You think this is a hotel?" "It's my closet," Marge said evenly. "I keep my things there. You don't need to lock it." His tone carried the familiar edge of authority he used at work. "We all share this house." Marge raised her brows. "Do we?" Sean's nostrils flared. "Mom, I'm serious. Unlock it. You're acting paranoid." Her voice was calm, almost polite. "No, I'm acting private." He stepped forward, hand reaching for the knob. She moved faster, not by much, but enough to close the distance between them. Her eyes met his, steady and unblinking. "Start respecting rules," he warned. She tilted her head slightly, the faintest trace of amusement touching her voice. "I will," she said. "You should too." For a moment, neither of them moved. The tension between them was a held breath, a drawn bowstring. Then Sean dropped his hand, muttered something under his breath, and walked away. Marge stood in the hallway until the sound of his footsteps faded. The air felt lighter, like a window had opened somewhere she couldn't see. She turned back toward the closet, fingertips brushing the chain at her neck. The lock gleamed faintly in the light. Saturday arrived heavy with humidity and the smell of wet pavement. Marge was folding laundry in the den when Monica's voice floated up the stairs, bright and brittle. "Just a heads up, Marge. We're having company tonight. Please don't clutter the kitchen while we're serving dinner." The words were polite, the meaning sharp. Marge folded the last towel with careful precision, pressing each edge flat. "Of course," she said quietly, though no one was there to hear her. By evening, the house was full of voices that didn't belong. Laughter too loud, heels too sharp against the tile, the scent of roasted chicken and citrus candles drifting through the vents. Marge stood at the top of the stairs for a moment, listening. She caught fragments of conversation, Monica bragging about the new layout, Sean telling someone how much work it had taken to make the old place presentable. Her place. Her home. Marge slipped her cardigan on, walked past the kitchen door, and glanced inside just long enough to see her own blue porcelain dishes set on the table. The ones she'd wrapped and stored years ago after Tom died. Monica had repurposed them, apparently. The guests smiled, sipping wine, oblivious to the theft of memory happening right under their noses. "Mom," Sean said sharply when he saw her, "could you? We're serving right now. Maybe give us a little space." Marge met his eyes, said nothing, and turned away. She went to the garage. It smelled faintly of oil and pine cleaner, a place that still felt honest. She sat on the low workbench beside Tom's old toolbox, unwrapped a sandwich from wax paper, and poured lukewarm coffee from a thermos. The bread was soft, the air thick with the hum of the outdoor light buzzing overhead. From inside came bursts of laughter, the scrape of forks on china, Monica's smooth voice narrating every detail of her minimalist transformation. Marge chewed slowly, listening. Each sound felt like a small erasure, another inch of space taken from her. But she refused to feel small. She reached into her purse, touching the folded note from Lucy, the cool edge of the house key, the faint outline of the deed. Her phone buzzed once against the wood bench, an email alert. The name that flashed on screen made her smile. Clarence Dean, Senior Legal Clinic. The subject line read, Template, Notice of Intent. Marge wiped her fingers, opened the message, and read each line twice. The language was crisp, professional. A statement of authority masked as courtesy. Clarence had even highlighted the sections she could personalize. Firm but fair, he'd written beneath it. She set the phone aside for a moment and took another slow sip of coffee, letting the words settle inside her like a warm stone. The garage door creaked. A small shadow slipped through the narrow opening. Lucy's voice came in a whisper. Grandma? Marge turned, smiling before she even saw her. The girl carried a real dinner plate covered with foil, the edges steaming slightly. I saved you food, Lucy whispered. Mom said you were probably fine, but I didn't think so. Marge took the plate, her eyes softening. You're a good girl, Lucy. Lucy perched on the step stool beside her, swinging her feet nervously. Why do they treat you like that? Marge cut a piece of chicken, the silverware clinking softly. Because they think they can? Will they always? Lucy's voice cracked. Marge looked toward the faint light under the kitchen door, then back at her granddaughter. No, she said. It won't be like this much longer. Something in her tone made Lucy stare, wide-eyed. Promise? Marge nodded. Promise. A shout echoed from inside, Monica calling Lucy's name. The girl jumped. I should go. Finish your milk first, Marge said, handing her the thermos lid like a cup. Lucy drank quickly, then slipped back through the door, leaving the faint scent of shampoo and innocence behind. When the garage was silent again, Marge took out a pen from Tom's toolbox and pulled a pad of paper closer. She began to write, slowly at first, then with certainty. To whom it may concern, the letter began, her handwriting neat, deliberate. This is a formal notice of intent regarding the property located at 211 Birchwood Lane. She wrote until the final period, then read it aloud once, her voice steady. The language felt powerful, protective, like armor she hadn't known she owned. The garage light flickered once, then steadied. She folded the paper and slid it into her purse beside the deed and Lucy's note. The laughter inside had turned raucous now, a chorus of careless voices. Marge stood, brushed crumbs from her lap, and turned off the light. In the darkness, her reflection caught faintly in the garage window, her eyes calm, her mouth set in quiet determination. Sunday afternoon brought a rare stillness to Birchwood Lane. No wind, no voices, just the faint ticking of the clock above the mantel and the slow rhythm of Marge's heart as she sat at the dining table, rereading the document she'd written in the garage the night before. She'd rewritten it twice now, once by hand, once on the library computer that morning, where the printer's hum had sounded like quiet applause. The final copy sat before her, neat, professional, backed by Clarence's legal seal in the bottom corner. A single line at the top glimmered like polished steel. Formal notice of termination of permission to occupy premises. Her fingers brushed the paper, steady. Every word was hers. Deliberate, lawful, unstoppable. The house felt oddly small that afternoon, like it had shrunk to fit the truth inside it. Sean and Monica were in the living room, half watching a football game, half bickering over takeout. Their voices carried through the air, the familiar static of two people too comfortable in someone else's home. Marge stood, smoothed the front of her cardigan, and walked in. Sean glanced up, distracted. "Hey, Mom, can this wait? It can't." Her voice was calm but carried the precision of something sharp being unwrapped. She held out an envelope, white against the gray of her sleeve. "You'll want to read this." Monica rolled her eyes. "What now? Another complaint about dishes?" Sean sighed, hit mute on the TV remote, and took the envelope. He tore it open lazily, reading the first line aloud with a smirk. "Formal notice of..." Wait, what? His eyes flicked down the page. "Mom, what is this?" "Notice," she said evenly. "You've been living here rent-free for almost 4 years. That ends in 30 days. For a second, no one moved. Then Sean laughed. A quick, disbelieving bark. "You're joking. You're actually... Mom, this isn't... You can't do this." Monica's face froze mid-smile. "This is ridiculous. You don't even understand how this works. You're..." She leaned forward, voice dripping disdain. "You're being senile." Marge didn't flinch. "No," she said, sliding her phone onto the coffee table, the screen glowing faintly. "I'm being precise." She tapped play. Monica's own voice filled the room, cold, unmistakable. "That old stuff's just filth collecting dust. You should thank us for helping." The sound was crisp, clear, recorded weeks earlier when Marge's phone had been left on the kitchen counter, red light blinking quietly as Monica spoke without restraint. Sean's mouth opened, but no words came. Monica's eyes widened, her hand flying to her throat. You recorded me?" Marge folded her arms. "You called my husband's memories filth, my life junk, and you did it under my roof." Sean stood abruptly, color flooding his face. "Mom, that's not what she meant." "Stop," Marge interrupted. The single word landed hard, slicing through the air. "You've both said and done enough." The phone buzzed once more. An incoming message. Marge didn't even look at it. Clarence's name appeared on the screen, his words short but damning. "That qualifies as psychological elder abuse. Keep the recording. You're protected." Monica took a step back, her voice shrill now. "Oh, come on. You can't actually think." Sean turned on her. "Would you just stop talking, Monica?" For the first time, Marge saw him falter. The confident son, the self-declared decision-maker, suddenly looking like a boy caught in a lie too big to explain away. She leaned forward, placing both palms on the coffee table, her reflection splitting across its glass surface. "You moved in here to help, Sean. You said it was temporary. You took space, control, and respect. Things you never earned. But this house..." Her hand brushed the table, steady as iron. "Belongs to me." Sean's eyes softened, shifting from disbelief to something like panic. "Mom, wait. We can talk about this. We can fix it." Marge picked up the notice, slid it back into its envelope and handed it to him again. Then put it in writing. The words landed like a verdict. Monica stood frozen, her mouth open but empty of sound. Sean looked down at the paper, his thumb trembling on the edge. Outside, a lawnmower started somewhere down the block. An ordinary noise cutting through the extraordinary quiet. Marge turned and walked toward the hallway, the click of her shoes steady against the wood floor. At the bottom of the stairs, she paused and glanced back once. Sean and Monica were still standing there, both small now, both uncertain. 30 days, Marge said simply. "Make good use of them." She climbed the stairs without waiting for a reply. At the top, she slipped into her room, locked the door, and sat at her desk. The recording still played faintly from downstairs, Monica's voice echoing through the vents like a ghost of its own cruelty. Marge opened her email and began typing. Clarence. It's done. Her finger hovered over the send button. Rain rolled in again 2 days later, gray and relentless, turning the yard into a wash of colorless puddles. The notice sat unopened on the coffee table now, exactly where Marge had left it. Sean had refused to move it, as though touching it might make it more real. Marge descended the stairs with the same slow precision she'd used when climbing them that night. Her coffee steamed in one hand, her phone in the other. She caught the sound of Sean pacing in the kitchen, voice tight. "Squatters' rights," he was saying. "That's what I read. She can't just kick us out. Not without cause." Monica's voice trembled in reply. "You said 30 days. We can stretch that, right?" Marge stepped into view, calm as a judge entering her own courtroom. "You can't stretch the law," she said, setting her mug on the counter. "But you can learn it." Sean turned, face red, exhaustion under his eyes. "I'm not leaving, Mom. I've built my life here. My work, my family, my—" "Your entitlement," she interrupted. "You built that too." Monica slammed a cabinet door. "You're being heartless. We've made this place better than it ever was. You should be thanking us." Marge didn't even look at her. "You'll have time to reminisce," she said quietly. "While you pack." Sean let out a bitter laugh. "I'll fight this." "I expect you to," Marge said. She turned and walked out of the kitchen before he could reply. That afternoon, the rain lightened, but the tension didn't. Marge sat in her car at the city's senior legal clinic, the wipers squeaking across the glass. Clarence Dean met her at the door, a soft-spoken man in a gray cardigan, who looked like he belonged in a library instead of a law office. "I read your notice," he said, adjusting his glasses. Strong, clear. "Now, you'll need to file for what's called a forcible entry and detainer action, standard process for removal." Marge nodded. "Already printed the form." His eyebrows lifted, impressed. "You came prepared." "I've had practice being underestimated," she said. Clarence chuckled, handed her a folder. "Then let's make this official. I'll represent you. Pro bono." Marge blinked. "Clarence, you don't have to—" "I want to," he said. "This kind of thing happens more than you think. But not everyone fights back." She smiled, the kind that came from the spine, not the lips. "Then they should." By the end of the week, the neighborhood had taken sides, quietly, behind curtains. Marge saw it in the glances, the whispering when she went to check her mail. Monica had been busy spreading her version of the story, the one where she and Sean were victims of an unwell old woman. On Thursday morning, Marge opened the door to find Monica standing on the porch, eyes puffy, mascara smeared artfully. A neighbor, Mrs. Klein, lingered on the sidewalk pretending to pull weeds, but clearly listening. Monica sniffed dramatically. "We just don't understand how you can be so cruel. We're family. You'd throw your own son out." Marge folded her arms, voice steady as ever. "You already threw me out once, remember? The trash can?" Monica's mouth twitched, color flaring in her cheeks. "That's different." "Not really." The screen door creaked as Marge stepped back inside, leaving Monica standing in the rain. Mrs. Klein straightened up slowly, one brow raised, and muttered, "Good for you," before heading home. That night, Lucy came to her before bed, tiptoeing down the hall in her socks. She hugged Marge tight, small arms fierce around her waist. "Dad's mad," she whispered. "He keeps saying you're trying to ruin everything." Marge smoothed the girl's hair, tucking it behind her ear. "Sometimes, when people lose power they shouldn't have had, they call it ruin." Lucy frowned, trying to understand. "Are you scared?" "No," Marge said softly. "I'm steady. That's different." Lucy leaned her head against Marge's side. "I want to live with you when I'm older. You'll always have a key. Marge said. Right here. She touched the chain around her neck, the same one that held the tiny brass key from her closet. Lucy smiled sleepily. Promise you'll keep it locked tight? I promise. The next morning, a manila envelope slid through the mail slot. Inside, Sean had left a typed letter. 3 pages of excuses, half legal jargon, half guilt. We have rights too, it read. You can't do this to your own family. Marge placed it neatly beside her morning toast and read it through twice. Then she picked up her pen, scrawled a note across the top. Response already filed. She folded it back into the envelope and left it on the kitchen counter for him to find. Outside, the sky cleared for the first time in days. A faint golden light fell across the lawn. Marge watched it spread through the window, slow and deliberate, like the world itself had finally taken her side. The courthouse smelled faintly of floor wax and old paper, the scent of things too stubborn to fade. Marge Ellis stood near the back of the room, clutching a manila folder labeled neatly in her handwriting. Evidence. She wore her good navy cardigan, pressed slacks, and her husband's silver watch. The brass key still hung around her neck, hidden under the collar, its faint weight reminding her that she'd already won the hardest part, finding her courage. Clarence sat beside her, calm and focused. You ready, Marge? He asked quietly. I've been ready for weeks, she said. Sean and Monica entered together, late and underdressed. Sean's jaw was tight, a faint sheen of sweat along his temples. Monica wore oversized sunglasses, though they were indoors, her lips pressed into a permanent frown. They looked less like a couple arriving for court and more like 2 people showing up to a reckoning they'd pretended wouldn't come. The bailiff called the case. Ellis versus Ellis, petition for forcible entry and detainer. The title landed in the room like thunder. The judge, a woman in her 50s with the dry patience of someone who'd seen every family argument under the sun, motioned them forward. Mrs. Ellis, she began, looking at Marge. You're the petitioner here. Go ahead. Marge nodded once and stood. Her papers didn't shake. Yes, Your Honor. My late husband and I purchased the property at 201 Birchwood Lane in 1983. I've lived there since. My son and his wife moved in temporarily after my husband's passing to help me manage the home. But they have refused to leave, have paid no rent, and have treated both me and the property without respect. She opened her folder and slid out the printed deed, the notice, and a USB drive. I've included the deed in both original and certified form, the termination notice I served 30 days ago, and an audio recording that demonstrates verbal and emotional mistreatment. The judge nodded, flipping through the papers. Efficiently presented, Mrs. Ellis. Thank you. Sean shifted beside his lawyer, a friend from work who looked barely out of college. Your Honor, Sean started. This isn't what it looks like. My mother invited us to live there. We made improvements to the house, serious ones, new floors, paint, appliances. Marge interjected softly. Paid with my checking account. The judge raised a hand. You'll each have your turn. Sean's voice rose. She's trying to evict her own family. There's got to be protection for that. Protection? Marge said, steady. For whom? The people living off my mortgage-free home while calling my life's work trash? Monica snapped. That's not fair. You twist everything. Mrs. Ellis, the judge warned, if you speak again out of turn, I'll have you removed. Monica sank back in her chair, eyes burning. Marge turned toward the bench again. Her voice didn't waver. I didn't throw out family, Your Honor. They threw out respect. Even the clerk stopped typing for a moment. The judge exhaled slowly. Mrs. Ellis, your paperwork is in order. The court recognizes your ownership of the property and your right to terminate occupancy. Mr. Ellis, you and your wife are hereby ordered to vacate the premises within 21 days. The gavel came down with a solid crack. Monica gasped as if struck. Sean stared straight ahead, jaw working, color draining from his face. Clarence closed his folder gently, his expression unreadable but quietly triumphant. The judge gathered her files. Case concluded. Next matter. As the courtroom emptied, Marge gathered her papers into perfect alignment and slipped them into her folder. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply stood taller. Sean approached her, eyes wild, voice low enough for only her and Clarence to hear. "You'll regret this," he said, each word bitten off like he was chewing glass. Marge met his gaze with the stillness of someone who had survived worse storms. "No," she said softly. "You'll learn from it." Clarence stepped forward, his presence quietly protective. "Mr. Ellis, I suggest you start packing. That order's enforceable immediately." Sean's nostrils flared, but he said nothing. He turned, stormed past Monica, and pushed through the courthouse doors into the pale gray daylight. For a moment, Marge stayed where she was, feeling the echo of the gavel still thrum in her chest. Justice had a sound, she realized. A clean, final sound. Clarence handed her a copy of the ruling. "You did it," he said. Marge took the paper, her reflection faint in its glossy surface. "Not yet," she said. "But I will." The house had gone quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not peace, but pressure. The sort of silence that came right before something cracked. For the first time in years, Marge didn't avoid the kitchen in the morning. She moved through it with the calm of ownership, her slippers soft against the tile that still smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. The judgment from court sat pinned to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like Ohio. 21 days. The numbers stared at her every time she poured coffee. Upstairs, drawers slammed, the rhythm of packing, angry, careless. Sean and Monica had started that morning, the air between them already charged. They spoke in sharp bursts that carried down the hall. "You take that side," Sean barked. "No, not that. Just leave it." Monica's voice followed, brittle and venomous. "I'm not your moving crew." "Sean?" Marge ignored it. She'd stopped engaging days ago. Instead, she moved methodically through the living room, checking what she'd need to photograph later. Every frame of glass was a document. Every bruise on a wall, evidence. Clarence had taught her that. "If they damage it," he'd said, "you record it. Don't give emotion a seat at the table. Give the facts one." At noon, Marge heard the first crash. Porcelain meeting tile. A second followed, sharper, unmistakably deliberate. She walked to the kitchen doorway and saw Monica standing over the shards of the blue dinner plates, the same ones Monica had repurposed for guests. "Oh," Monica said, her tone falsely light. "Clumsy me." Marge didn't move. "Those belong to my mother." "Then she had bad taste," Monica snapped, stepping on a shard as she walked away. It cracked again beneath her heel. Marge exhaled through her nose, steady. She pulled her phone from her cardigan pocket and took a picture of the mess, flash bright in the dim light. Another photo. Then another. Sean appeared behind her, voice low. "You don't have to do this, Mom." "Yes," she said, not looking at him. "I do." He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes darting toward the camera. "You think this will make you happy?" "No," she said, taking another photo. "It'll make me free." He started to say something else, but she'd already turned away. By afternoon, boxes began stacking near the front door. Lucy hovered at the edge of the hallway, hugging a stuffed rabbit so worn the ears had gone flat. Her eyes were red. "Grandma?" she whispered. Marge crouched beside her, the joints in her knees aching, but she didn't mind. "What is it, sweetheart?" "I don't want to go," Lucy said, voice trembling. "I like it here. I like our walks to the library and when you make pancakes that look like hearts." Marge smiled, brushing the girl's cheek with her thumb. I like those things too. Can't I just stay? Lucy whispered, glancing toward the stairs as if afraid her parents would hear. Marge looked into her granddaughter's tear-bright eyes and saw her own reflection there. Smaller, sadder, but strong. You'll always have a place with me, she said. Safely, that's a promise. Lucy pressed her face into Marge's shoulder, trying not to cry. Dad says you hate us. Marge's arms tightened around her. No, honey, I just stopped letting them decide what love looks like. From upstairs came another slam, followed by a muffled curse. Lucy flinched. Marge kissed the top of her head. Go on. Help me pack your books into a bag for when you visit, hmm? Lucy nodded, wiped her eyes, and ran off toward her room. That evening, Marcia arrived, raincoat dripping, her hair frizzing in the damp. She set her tote bag on the counter, already filled with papers and copies of court forms. I talked to Clarence, she said. He's arranging something called supervised visitation. Lucy can come stay weekends. They can't stop it. Marge felt something loosen inside her. Not joy, exactly, but release. Thank you, Marcia. Don't thank me. Just don't waver. They'll test every inch of that order before they leave. Marge nodded, watching through the kitchen window as Sean's truck backed into the driveway again, headlights slicing across the wet street. Monica was on the porch, arms crossed, glaring up toward the window where Marge stood. I'm not wavering, Marge said. Later that night, as boxes piled higher and Monica's muttering turned to full-blown weeping, Marge sat in the den with her phone. One by one, she uploaded the photos of broken dishes, damaged furniture, and scuffed floors. Each image attached neatly to a digital file labeled Property Condition, Ellis Home. Lucy came down one last time in pajamas, holding her stuffed rabbit. She climbed into Marge's lap, silent but safe. The ticking clock filled the space between them. Grandma? Lucy whispered. What's gonna happen now? Marge smoothed her hair and looked toward the stairs where Sean and Monica argued, their voices rising again. Now, she said quietly, they learn how heavy a door feels when it closes behind you. The day they left was bright and windless, the kind of spring morning that didn't know what had happened in the house it touched. Birds chattered in the oak by the driveway, and the grass glowed with the wet sheen of last night's rain. Sean and Monica loaded the last of their boxes into the truck without a word to her. Every slam of a door echoed across the cul-de-sac. Every scrape of cardboard against metal another punctuation mark in a long, bitter sentence. Marge stood on the porch, arms folded, watching. She didn't gloat. She didn't wave. When the truck door slammed and the tires spun against the curb, she just said softly to herself, and that's that. The taillights turned the corner and vanished. The street grew still again. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Inside, the house looked hollow, stripped but not empty. The silence was heavier now, more honest. She walked from room to room, taking stock. The living room rug was gone. The couch cushions were mismatched. A picture frame lay face down on the floor, glass cracked. Marge crouched to pick it up. It was her wedding photo, the one Monica had once dismissed as dated. Tom stood beside her in his gray suit, eyes kind and slightly mischievous even in black and white. The crack ran diagonally through his smile. Marge pressed the photo to her chest for a moment before setting it gently on the table. Then she turned to the door, pulled a small box from her purse, and set down her new set of brass locks. It took her most of the afternoon. She moved slowly but surely, screwdriver firm in her hand, each click of the mechanism a soft declaration, mine again. When the final bolt slid into place, she tested the key twice, just to hear the clean sound of it turning. By dusk, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the sunset painting the street in streaks of coral and gold. The quiet wasn't threatening anymore. It was hers. Lucy arrived that Friday evening with an overnight bag nearly as big as she was. Marcia dropped her off, promising to pick her up Sunday after church. The moment Lucy stepped inside, her shoulders dropped. Like the air here was lighter. She ran to hug Marge, laughing through the remnants of a long week's tension. "It smells like cookies again," she said. "That's because I baked some," Marge replied. "Help yourself before I eat them all." Lucy grinned, already halfway to the kitchen. That night, after dinner and a movie, Lucy fell asleep on the couch, her rabbit tucked under one arm, her plate of half-eaten cookies on the coffee table. Marge tucked a blanket around her and stood watching for a long time, the faint rise and fall of Lucy's breathing like a metronome, steady and safe. By Saturday, the house no longer felt like a battlefield. Marge opened the door to the room Monica had called her office. A sterile little space that had always smelled faintly of dry perfume and disinfectant. She stood in the doorway for a long time, then smiled. By noon, the boxes were unpacked, the curtains replaced with soft white ones that caught the light. She brought in the armchair from the den, set up a small reading lamp, and laid her quilt, the one they'd nearly thrown away, across the back of it. Her wedding portrait, repaired with new glass, hung on the wall above the shelf. Around it, she arranged the photos that had survived. Lucy as a toddler, Tom holding a fishing rod, her own face laughing beside a lake from some long-forgotten trip. It wasn't about nostalgia anymore. It was about proof. That she'd lived. That she'd built something that mattered. Marcia stopped by in the afternoon, knocking twice before letting herself in. "Well," she said, looking around, "this place finally feels like you again." "It's getting there." Marcia grinned, then held out a rectangular package wrapped in brown paper. "For the threshold." Marge tore the paper carefully. Inside was a doormat. Simple choir fibers with black script that read, "Welcome to Marge's house." Marge's throat tightened. She bent to place it outside the front door, smoothing the edges flat. When she stepped back, the words looked bold against the porch, grounded, certain. "It's perfect," she said. "Not quite." Marcia pulled out her phone. "Now it's perfect." She snapped a picture, the two of them smiling in the fading light. Later that evening, after Lucy had gone to bed, Marge sat in her new reading chair, laptop open, a cup of chamomile cooling beside her. The email icon blinked once. From Clarence Dean. Subject, appeal outcome. She clicked. Sean Ellis's appeal has been officially denied. The judgment stands. Congratulations, homeowner. Marge leaned back, exhaling slowly. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint rustle of curtains, even the distant sound of a train, all of it folded into a single truth. Peace had come back home. She closed her laptop, stood, and looked around the room. The lamplight glowed against the photo of her and Tom. His smile seemed different now. Proud, even. "I kept it all safe," she whispered. "Just like you'd want." The article hit the front page of the Cleveland Herald on a Wednesday morning, just below the fold, but above the grocery ads. Senior stands her ground. Local woman wins legal battle to reclaim her home. There was a photo, too. Marge on her front porch beside the doormat that read, "Welcome to Marge's house." Her hands clasped neatly in front of her, a small but resolute smile on her face. The caption read, "Margaret Ellis, 68, of Birchwood Lane, successfully defended her property rights after a prolonged family dispute." Marge stared at the paper for a long time before she turned it over and slid it beside her toast. She didn't need to read it twice. The phone started ringing before 8. First, Mrs. Klein from next door. "You did what most of us only dream of, honey," she said. "About time someone showed a little backbone around here." Then Pastor Jeff from church. You've got folks inspired, Marge. We're talking about adding a seniors legal resources group to the outreach program. You up for helping us get it started? Marge smiled, running her thumb over the edge of her coffee mug. I suppose I can spare a few afternoons. By noon, 3 casseroles had landed on her doorstep, one with a card that read, "You're an inspiration," and another, in shaky handwriting, simply, "Good for you, Marge. Evelyn from choir." She laughed softly as she stacked them on the counter, the smell of baked macaroni filling the kitchen. Across town, Monica was not laughing. She'd tried, of course, logging into every social media account she had, posting versions of the truth, with filtered photos and long captions about elder confusion and ungrateful parents. But the comments turned against her within hours. "You sound like the one with issues," one user wrote. Another, "If she owned the house, she had every right. Learn respect." By evening, Monica deleted her posts and set her accounts to private. Sean fared worse. Someone from HR had clipped the article and emailed it to him with the subject line, "Hope everything's okay at home." He told his coworkers it was blown out of proportion, but no one quite met his eyes after that. Clients canceled meetings. His phone went quiet. At night, while he paced the tiny apartment they'd rented, Monica muttered that it was Marge's fault. Sean didn't argue, but he didn't deny it either. Back on Birchwood Lane, Marge's days began to bloom again. Lucy came over every weekend, just as the court had arranged. They baked, gardened, and filled the new reading room with laughter and half-finished jigsaw puzzles. On Friday, Lucy handed her a folded note from school, sealed with a gold sticker. It was from her English teacher. "Mrs. Ellis," it read, "thank you for showing Lucy what integrity looks like. We talk about courage in class. She talks about you." Marge held the note for a moment, her throat tightening. Then she slipped it into the top drawer of her desk beside Lucy's first letter, the one with the sunflower sticker. That weekend, she received an email from the Herald reporter who'd written her story. "There's been a strong response from readers," it said. "Would you consider speaking at an upcoming senior housing seminar about your experience?" Marge read it twice, unsure at first if she should laugh or cry. Then she typed back, "I'd be honored." When the day came, the community center auditorium smelled faintly of coffee and old wood polish. About 50 people filled the folding chairs. Widows, retirees, a few curious younger folks. Clarence sat in the front row beside Marcia, both beaming like proud parents. Marge took the podium with her notes trembling only slightly in her hands. She didn't talk about revenge. She talked about respect. How easily it can erode when people stop believing their lives still matter. How ownership isn't just about property, but dignity. She finished with quiet conviction. If someone tells you your things, your memories, your worth, are junk, she said, don't argue. Show them how wrong they are, paper by paper, step by step. The room rose in applause. Marcia wiped at her eyes. Clarence clapped until his hands were red. Afterward, people lined up to shake her hand. Some with tears, others with small smiles of recognition. "You made us all feel a little braver," one woman said. Marge didn't know what to say except, "Thank you." That night, back at home, she set her speech papers on the table and took off her shoes. The quiet felt familiar again, but now it carried warmth instead of tension. Her phone buzzed once on the counter. A text from Clarence. Great turnout. "You did good, Marge. People are listening." She smiled, typing back, "Good. I'm not done talking." Then she turned off the lights, leaving the soft glow of the lamp by the window, the one in her reading room, shining out into the street. The first chill of autumn had crept into Cleveland, the kind that hinted at shorter days and longer thoughts. Marge Ellis sat at her kitchen table, a mug of tea steaming beside a neat stack of documents. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon and pencil shavings, the scent of new beginnings. On the table, she'd written a label in tidy block letters, Legacy Folder. Inside were sections divided by pastel tabs. Title, Will, Medical Directive, Letters. Each page sat in its sleeve, crisp and deliberate. She'd started this after the seminar when people began emailing her for advice. What happens next? They kept asking. What do we do once we win? So, Marge decided to show them. The title document came first, the house she had defended with every ounce of patience and steel she possessed. She slid it into the folder carefully, the paper cool against her fingers. Next came her new will. At the top, beneath the attorney's letterhead, a paragraph read, Beneficiary, Lucy Ellis conditions, demonstrated independence, kindness, and care for others. She smiled faintly, picturing Lucy years from now, maybe running a small library, or a shelter, or something equally brave. The girl had that same quiet backbone Marge had learned too late to appreciate in herself. She capped her pen and leaned back in the chair. The brass key around her neck clinked softly as it settled against her chest. That afternoon, Marcia dropped by with her usual tote bag, its canvas bulging with papers and snacks. You look like a CEO, she said, eyeing the stacks on the table. Just making sure the next chapter's in order, Marge replied. Marcia plopped down beside her. You know, most people your age are collecting figurines, not filing power of attorney documents. Some collect porcelain, Marge said, flipping a page. I collect control. Marcia laughed, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small laptop. Speaking of control, I made you something. On the screen was a simple blog page, pale cream background, clean font, the header reading, Stand Your Ground, a senior's guide to starting over. Marge blinked. You made this? With help from my nephew. You just need to write posts. Advice, resources, stories. Whatever you want. You're already helping people. Might as well reach the ones who can't make it to church or city hall. Marge hesitated, her reflection hovering faintly on the blank page. I wouldn't even know where to start. Start with the truth, Marcia said. You're good at that. Later that week, Marge's mailbox filled with more letters than bills, questions from seniors, thank yous from strangers, even one handwritten note from a woman in Pennsylvania. You made me call my lawyer today. Thank you. One evening, Clarence stopped by the house after work, his briefcase swinging gently at his side. He stood in the doorway with a small smile. You've been keeping me busy, Marge. I've been sharing what you taught me. He handed her an envelope stamped with the county seal. And the county noticed. They're considering you for the Community Advocacy Award next month. Marge blinked. Me? He nodded. You're not just a case anymore. You're a movement. She laughed softly, shaking her head. Lord, Tom would have rolled his eyes at that. Maybe, but he'd have been proud too. Clarence tipped his hat and left her standing there in the golden spill of the porch light, the envelope heavy in her hand. That night she wandered through the house, her house, stopping in each room as if reacquainting herself with an old friend. In the living room, the fireplace glowed faintly, embers breathing soft orange light across the furniture. She reached for the folded quilt that had survived everything, the rain, the ridicule, the trash bin, and laid it gently over the back of the couch. The fabric caught the firelight, the stitched initials T&M shimmering for a moment before settling back into shadow. She sat down, pulling her cardigan tighter, the hum of the house steady around her. Every clock ticked in sync. On the coffee table sat her phone, buzzing once with a new notification, a comment on her blog. Her very first post, titled The Paper Trail Back to Power. The comment was anonymous. You think you've won, but you haven't seen the whole file yet. Marge stared at the words, the faint glow of the screen reflecting in her eyes. Then, from the front porch, came a quiet rustle, the flap of her mailbox, metal against metal. She stood slowly, the brass key at her neck cool as ice. Morning light spilled through the kitchen blinds in fractured bands, striping the counter in gold and shadow. Marge stood by the sink, rinsing her teacup, when a slow crunch of tires pulled into the driveway. The sound didn't startle her. Not anymore. Too many months of reclaiming had taught her that the world always came knocking again, one way or another. Through the window she saw a familiar truck, dull red, edges rusted from years of Cleveland salt. Sean's. He sat there for a long minute, engine idling, face unreadable behind the windshield. Finally, he stepped out. No Monica this time. No bluster. Just her son, shoulders hunched, an envelope clutched tight in one hand. Marge wiped her hands on a towel and opened the door before he could knock. "Mom," he said softly. "Sean." The word landed between them like a neutral handshake. No welcome, no hostility, just fact. He hesitated on the porch, looking smaller than she remembered. "Can I come in?" Marge studied him a moment longer before stepping aside. For a few minutes. The air inside was warm, the scent of lemon polish and cinnamon drifting from the diffuser near the entryway. Sean's eyes moved over the house, the repaired photo frames, the neatly stacked books, the new doormat visible through the screen door. Everything he'd once called clutter now felt like order. He swallowed hard, pulled the envelope from his coat pocket, and held it out. "I wrote you something." Marge took it without speaking. The paper was creased, smudged near the edges. She gestured toward the table. "Sit, if you want." He did, his fingers worrying the seam of his sleeve while she unfolded the letter. The handwriting was familiar. The same hurried scrawl from birthday cards years ago, when he'd still cared enough to write them. She read silently, eyes moving line by line. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know I'm trying. I see now how I treated you, how I let Monica's attitude get to me. We thought we were helping, but I guess we didn't see what we were taking. I've changed, Mom. I'm different now. I want to start over. Maybe come by sometimes. Maybe—" The sentence trailed off in crossed-out ink. Beneath it, one final line. "I'm sorry if I made you feel small. That wasn't what I meant." When she looked up, Sean was watching her like a man waiting for a verdict. "I've changed," he said quietly. "Really. I've got a new job. I'm sober. I'm trying to do things right." Marge folded the letter carefully, aligning the creases. "That's good, Sean." He nodded, eager, searching for a softening in her tone. "Then maybe I could, but not enough to come back." The words weren't cruel. They were calm, measured, unshakable. The way she'd said "I do" years ago, or "that's mine," in the courthouse. Sean blinked, caught between pride and pain. "You don't even want to think about it." "I already have," she said. "For months. Every day since you left, I've thought about what forgiveness should look like. And I realized it's not the same as forgetting." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. "You're not even going to read the rest?" "I read enough." Marge rose, crossed to the cabinet beside the refrigerator, and opened a drawer. She pulled out a manila folder, the one labeled Court Ruling. Final. She slid a copy of the judgment across the table toward him. "Keep it. A reminder that boundaries don't mean bitterness." Sean stared at the paper as if it burned. "You really think I deserved all this?" "No," she said. "I think you earned it." For a moment, neither moved. The clock on the wall ticked in time with their silence. Sean finally pushed back his chair. "I guess that's it then." "For now," she replied. "Change takes time. You say you're different. Show me." Live like it. He hesitated in the doorway, eyes glassy with something between guilt and gratitude. You really believe I can? Marge looked past him, out to the yard where her rose bushes were just beginning to bud again. I believe people can grow, she said, just not always under the same roof. Sean gave a small, hollow nod. Then he turned, walked down the porch steps and back to his truck. Through the window, Marge watched him sit behind the wheel for a long time before finally driving away. The sound of the engine faded down Birchwood Lane, swallowed by the steady hum of early autumn wind. She looked down at the letter still on the table, edges bent, words half pleading, half practiced. Then she folded it once more and slipped it into her legacy folder, behind the tab marked Letters. But before closing it, she took a pen and wrote across the top in firm, steady script, Read, and released. She snapped the folder shut. The brass key at her neck swung gently, catching a sliver of light. The morning was clear and crisp, sunlight catching on the last gold leaves that clung stubbornly to the maple in Marge's yard. The wind carried a scent of wood smoke and earth, that bittersweet perfume of fall in Cleveland. Marge stood at the curb, toolbox open beside her, a small brush in her hand. The old mailbox still bore its fading, uneven letters, the Ellis family. She dipped the brush into black enamel paint and began, stroke by deliberate stroke, to cover the old name. When she finished, the metal gleamed with new lettering. M. Ellis, owner. She stepped back, wiping her fingers on a rag. For a long moment she simply stared at the words, the sunlight glinting across the paint. They looked proud, permanent, hers. Looks good, said a voice behind her. Marcia leaned on the fence holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She handed one over. Thought you might need a toast to go with your Declaration of Independence? Marge chuckled. You think it's too bold? I think it's exactly bold enough. By afternoon, the house was alive again. The living room glowed with the scent of baked apples and the hum of conversation. Neighbors who'd stood by quietly during the storm were now gathered around the coffee table, setting down pies and trays of cookies. Pastor Jeff had brought flowers. Clarence arrived in his best gray suit, holding a small certificate tucked in an envelope. This place looks different, Mrs. Klein said, peering around the room. It is different, Marge replied, smiling. In the hallway, Lucy darted back and forth, helping guests hang their coats. Her laughter lifted through the house, light and unguarded. The sound of something healing. Grandma, can I show them my room? She asked. Marge nodded. Go ahead, you pick the paint, you get the credit. Lucy grabbed Marcia's hand and tugged her down the hall. The room at the end, once Monica's so-called office, now shone bright with yellow walls and hand-painted sunflowers that climbed from baseboard to ceiling. In the corner stood a white daybed with a sunflower-patterned comforter, a bookshelf half-filled with Lucy's favorite novels and sketchbooks. Marcia gasped. Well, if this isn't the happiest room in Ohio, Lucy grinned, twirling once in the sunlight. Grandma said every girl needs a space that feels like hers. Marge watched from the doorway, her heart full and quiet. As dusk settled, the gathering shifted to the backyard. Strings of soft white lights framed the patio. Marge stood by the folding table, her new Community Advocacy Award glinting beneath the bulbs. Clarence raised his glass of sparkling cider. To Marge Ellis, he said, voice carrying through the cool evening air. Proof that age doesn't make you weaker. It just makes you more dangerous in court. Laughter rippled through the group, followed by applause. Marge smiled, shaking her head. You make me sound like a criminal mastermind. Marcia grinned. You kind of are. In the paperwork department? The laughter faded into easy conversation and clinking glasses. For the first time in what felt like years, Marge's house hummed not with conflict, but community. 2 weeks later, she found herself standing behind another podium, this one in the city auditorium downtown. The senior advocacy event had drawn a larger crowd than expected. Reporters, social workers, law students, retirees clutching notepads. She adjusted the microphone and glanced at the row of familiar faces. Clarence, Marcia, Pastor Jeff, and Lucy sitting proudly in the front row, her sunflower hair clip catching the light. Marge took a breath and began. She spoke of ownership, but not just of homes, of dignity, of boundaries, of learning to call your life your own after years of shrinking for someone else's comfort. I was told my memories were clutter, she said, voice steady, that my history was filth. But all they really wanted was control. And once I remembered what was mine, not just in law, but in worth, I realized something. She paused, looking out across the silent audience. No one throws away a woman like me. Applause thundered through the hall. Some stood, others wiped their eyes. Even Clarence's calm composure cracked into a grin. Lucy jumped to her feet, clapping until her palms turned pink. Marge felt tears rise, but they didn't fall. She simply nodded in thanks and stepped back from the microphone as the lights above her warmed to gold. After the speech, she lingered in the empty hall, letting the echo of her words fade into stillness. Marcia joined her, holding out a folded newspaper, tomorrow's early edition. The headline already printed in thick black type, "No one throws away a woman like me. Cleveland seniors fight for her home inspires change." Marge traced the letters with her finger. "Would you look at that? You've officially named your home," Marcia said softly, and the world heard it. The first hint of spring came early that year, a soft thaw that turned the air damp and forgiving. Marge Ellis stood in her front yard at sunrise, the world still quiet except for the hum of distant traffic and the whistle of a sparrow on the power line. She wore her gardening gloves and a faded denim jacket that once belonged to Tom. Steam curled from the mug of coffee she balanced on the porch rail. At her feet, a trowel gleamed in the fresh light, half buried in the dark, wet soil. The front garden, once Monica's complaint, an eyesore of overgrowth, had come alive again under Marge's care. Tulip shoots lined the walkway, their green tips like promises. She knelt, pressing her fingers into the dirt. It was cool and pliant, a living thing, not to be managed but partnered with. She smiled to herself, planting one more bulb, then another. The brass key at her neck swung lightly as she worked. Behind her, the screen door creaked. Lucy padded out barefoot, still in pajamas patterned with sunflowers. She yawned, rubbing her eyes. "Morning, Grandma," she murmured. "Morning, sweetheart. You're up early." Lucy crouched beside her, digging with her hands. "Mom says I shouldn't get my nails dirty." Marge handed her the trowel. "Good thing you're not with her right now." Lucy giggled, the sound as light as birdsong. Together they worked in silence for a few minutes, the only noise the rustle of soil and the drip of dew sliding off the gutter. "What's this one called?" Lucy asked, pointing to a small potted sprig. "Lavender," Marge said. "For the edge of the garden." Lucy leaned close and inhaled deeply. "Smells like you." Marge smiled. "Then we'll plant two." By mid-morning, the house smelled of cinnamon again. Marge stood at the stove, flipping pancakes, while Lucy colored at the kitchen table. Sunlight poured through the window, catching the edge of Marge's new framed headline on the wall. "No one throws away a woman like me." It still made her chuckle sometimes, that something so fierce could look so lovely in a gold frame. Her days had settled into a rhythm now. Mornings in the garden, afternoons at her desk, nights with a book by the fire. She wrote in her blog every other day. Short essays about self-advocacy, about resilience, about the way peace sometimes required a paper trail. Hundreds of people followed her now. "You've become a voice," Clarence had said last week. "Even the state housing office linked your site." Marge didn't write for the attention. She wrote because silence, she'd learned, was where control went to die. On Fridays, Marcia came by for tea and gossip, her laugh bright enough to shake the windows. They sat on the porch, watching neighbors walk their dogs or water their lawns. "You realize," Marcia said one morning, "you're famous in a 3-mile radius." Marge sipped her tea. "Then I pity the other 2 miles." Marcia laughed. "You ever hear from him?" Marge shook her head. "No, and that's a mercy I'll keep." Marcia nodded, her smile softening. "You earned this calm, Marge. Don't let anyone rent space in it again." They clinked mugs in silent agreement. One evening, as twilight sank over the neighborhood, the phone on Marge's counter buzzed. A familiar name flashed across the screen: Monica Ellis. Marge stared at it for a moment, thumb hovering. Then she pressed block, the motion smooth, almost musical. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound she'd ever heard. Days slipped into weeks, the rhythm steady, kind. Marge baked. She read. She wrote. She cooked without apology. Too much butter, real sugar, the good vanilla. She stopped apologizing for pleasure. Sometimes she'd catch herself humming. Old songs, half-remembered tunes from the radio Tom used to play in the garage. The house carried the sound easily now. It no longer echoed. It lived. One afternoon, Clarence stopped by in his usual gray cardigan, holding a paper cup of coffee and that same warm, knowing smile. "Still the boss?" he asked, eyes twinkling. Marge leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, sunlight catching her silver hair. "Every day," she said. He laughed, nodding. "Good. I like knowing this place has the right captain." He turned to leave, but paused at the edge of the walkway, glancing at the lavender plants now growing strong beside the porch. "You ever miss the noise?" he asked quietly. Marge looked past him, toward the horizon streaked in gold and violet. "Only when I forget how loud peace can be." That night she sat by the window with her journal open, pen poised above a blank page. Outside, the garden swayed softly in the wind. She wrote 3 words in careful script. "Peace is earned." Then, from somewhere down the quiet street, a car door shut. Not hurried, deliberate. Headlights swept briefly across her window. The journal trembled faintly beneath her hand. The morning after the headlights, the street was quiet again. The car was gone, leaving only damp tire tracks glistening in the early light. Marge stood at her window, the curtains drawn just enough to watch the world come back to calm. Inside, her house was still. The kind of still that came not from emptiness, but from everything being exactly where it belonged. She slipped her robe tighter and began her walk, her daily ritual now. Room to room, the same circuit she'd taken for decades. Though this time it felt different. Each step was a small act of possession, quiet and complete. In the kitchen, she ran her fingers along the smooth counter where her teacup waited. The scent of lemon polish still lingered. The refrigerator hummed low, steady, not unlike the heartbeat of a home content at last. In the living room, the morning sun slanted through the sheer curtains, scattering across her shelves. The same shelves that once held only clutter in Sean's eyes. Now, they held stories. Every photograph, every ceramic bowl, every worn paperback carried a reason for staying. She reached for the framed headline on the wall. "No one throws away a woman like me." A faint smile touched her lips. The brass key around her neck swung gently as she turned down the hall. The hallway had always been narrow, a little uneven underfoot. Too many years of footsteps carved into the boards. At its center, she paused. A single nail had been hammered there the night before, just below the light switch. In her hand, she held a thin black frame containing the official deed. Her name printed in bold, firm type. Margaret Ellis, sole owner and occupant. She hung it carefully, stepping back to make sure it was straight. The glass caught a flicker of sunlight, glinting like a metal. There it was, proof not just of ownership, but of endurance. "Right where you belong," she whispered. In Lucy's room, the air smelled faintly of lavender and acrylic paint. The girls' weekend books lay stacked on the nightstand: Anne of Green Gables, Charlotte's Web, and a half-finished sketchbook open to a drawing of the house. Lucy had captured every detail, even the flowers. On the neatly made bed, Marge placed her quilt, the same one that had once hung limply over a trash bin. She smoothed it with both hands, feeling the stitches, the tiny imperfections from a lifetime ago. The initials, T and M, rested at the corner of the fold. "Guard her," she said quietly, "like you guarded me." She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, listening. Outside, a car door shut 2 streets away. The neighborhood was alive again. Children laughing on their way to school, the faint bark of a dog, a mail truck groaning into motion. Life continued. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel left behind by it. At her desk, her journal lay open to the previous night's words. "Peace is earned." She uncapped her pen and wrote beneath it, slow and deliberate, "This house belongs to its memories and its maker." Her hand lingered on the final period. The page seemed to glow under the morning light, soft and certain. She closed the book, pressed her palm flat against the cover, and let out a breath that trembled but didn't break. By evening, the sun melted into soft orange against the rooftops. Marge moved through her home one last time before bed, flipping light switches off as she went. The air carried the faint hum of night settling in. At the front door, she turned the deadbolt with a quiet click. 1, 2 turns. The sound solid and final. Then she reached for the porch light switch and paused, watching its soft glow spill over the new doormat. "Welcome to Marge's house." The brass letters on her mailbox caught the last trace of dusk. M. Ellis, owner. Satisfied, she turned off the light. The porch fell into peaceful darkness. She made herself a cup of tea and carried it to the armchair by the window, the same chair that had seen every version of her. The silent one, the grieving one, the defiant one, and now, the free one. Outside, the streetlight flickered on, pale gold over the lavender bushes Lucy had planted. The night was quiet except for the low sigh of wind through the eaves. Marge cupped the warm mug between her hands, the brass key resting just above her heart. She smiled faintly, the corners of her eyes soft with memory and triumph. The clock ticked once, steady as breath. "My own son threw my things out," she said into the quiet, voice steady as iron. "Called them filth. But I showed him who's the boss here." She took a slow sip of tea, set the cup down, and leaned back. Queen of her own kingdom, her crown made of patience, her throne built from persistence. The house, her house, exhaled around her, content at last.